Keaton was born into a vaudeville family in Pequot, Kansas. This was a town that his family was touring, and his mother, Myra Keaton, went into labor. There's some discussion on whether Keaton actually ever received his birth certificate because his family was traveling on the vaudeville circuit so often. I don't believe he actually ever received a birth certificate until later in life when he had to request it from the town of Pequot, Kansas. He was named Joseph to continue a tradition on his father's side. Buster was sixth in line in the name Joseph Keaton. His father owned a traveling show with Harry Houdini called the Mohawk Indian Medicine Company, or the Keaton Houdini Medicine Show Company. This company performed on stage and sold patent medicine on the side. Supposedly, Keaton acquired the nickname Buster at the age of about 18 months. Keaton took a tumble down a long flight of stairs without injury. After this, the infant sat up and shook it off, and a man named George Pardee, who was also an actor, remarked, "He's a regular Buster." After this, Keaton's father began to use the nickname to refer to the youngster, and Keaton himself retold this story, including in a 1964 interview with CBC's Telescope. In Keaton's retelling, he was 6 months old when this happened, and it was Harry Houdini who gave him the nickname. Keaton was performing with his parents in the Three Keatons at the age of 3. He first appeared on stage in 1899 in Wilmington, Delaware. The act was mainly a comedy sketch where his mother played a saxophone and he and his father performed center stage. The young Keaton disobeyed his father, and then the elder Keaton would respond by throwing him against the scenery, into the orchestra pit, or even into the audience. Keaton was hung on to by a suitcase handle, which was sewn into his clothing by his mother. The act involved as Keaton had to learn to take trick falls safely. The knockabout style of comedy, however, led to accusations of child abuse and occasionally arrest. I believe it was in New York where the Keatons were arrested by a do-gooder in the audience who was shocked by how Buster was treated. Keaton was eventually billed as the little boy who can't be damaged, and the overall act was the roughest act that was ever in the history of the stage. Years later, he said he was never hurt by his father, and the falls in physical comedy were a matter of proper technical execution. He said that the secret was that he had to land limp and break the fall with a foot or a hand. Buster would laugh during the acts, and he realized that this would confuse the audience, and so he adopted a stone face, and this was a trick that continued throughout his career. He never went to school. He only attended part of one day in school while performing in New York, and his mother was the one to teach him to read and write. However, by the time Buster was 21, his father's alcoholism threatened the reputation of the family act, and it impacted Keaton physically. So Keaton and his mother Myra left for New York, where his career quickly moved from vaudeville to film. Keaton also served in France with the United States Army's 40th Infantry Division. He suffered an ear infection that permanently impaired his hearing. From 1908 to 1916, when Keaton was still in his younger years, he attended the Actors Colony in the Bluffton neighborhood of Muskegon, along with other famous vaudevillians. In 1917, he met Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle in New York City, and Arbuckle was under contract to Joseph Schenck, who would later work for MGM. The Keaton family didn't approve of films, and Keaton himself had reservations about the film medium, but during his first meeting with Arbuckle, he was inspired and asked to jump in and start acting. Keaton was a real natural. In his first film, The Butcher Boy, he was hired on the spot. At the end of a day of filming, he asked to borrow one of the cameras to get a feel for how it worked. He took the camera back to his hotel room, where he dismantled it and reassembled it by morning. Soon, he was Arbuckle's second director, and he appeared in a total of 14 Arbuckle shorts, which takes us up to 1920. In these shorts, you can see Keaton laughing, and despite the violent nature of the comedy, Keaton and Arbuckle were close friends. Unfortunately, Arbuckle descended into bankruptcy because the media accused him of being responsible for the death of actress Virginia Rappe. Arbuckle was largely a scapegoat for the immorality that was happening at Hollywood parties, including the party where Virginia Rappe died. Arbuckle was eventually acquitted with an apology from the jury for the ordeal he underwent, but the damage had been done to Arbuckle's reputation. By 1916, Arbuckle was experiencing serious health problems. He had an infection on his leg that became a carbuncle so severe that doctors considered amputation. He was able to keep his leg, but he was prescribed morphine against the pain. He would later be accused of being addicted to morphine. Following his recovery, he started his own film company, Comique, in partnership with Joseph Schenck. Although Comique produced some of the best short pictures of the silent era, usually 2 reel films, he transferred his controlling interest in the company to Buster Keaton in 1918 and accepted Paramount's $3 million offer to make up to 18 feature films over 3 years. By 1921, Arbuckle had taken a break from his hectic film schedule and was suffering from second-degree burns due to an on-set accident. He checked into 3 rooms at the St. Francis Hotel, and then his subsequent scandal with the Virginia Rappe death would finish his career for all intents and purposes. Despite this, Buster was still working with Joseph Schenck, and he developed a 2-reel silent film comedy in 1921 called The High Sign in Venice Beach, California. Its runtime is 21 minutes. In the movie, Keaton plays a drifter who cons his way into working at an amusement park shooting gallery because he's an excellent shot. Believing Keaton is an expert marksman, the murderous gang, the Blinking Buzzards, takes notice, and the man they want to kill end up hiring Buster. The film ends with a wild chase through a house filled with secret passages and trapdoors. The High Sign was Keaton's first independent production, and it was a change from the violent slapstick of the films he had made with Fatty Arbuckle. Keaton strongly believed that comedy should be simple, and the short film showed the dry and quiet comedy style with Keaton's stone face that would become Keaton's trademark. The climactic chase scenes occurred on a split-level cutaway set on Venice Beach with revolving wall panels, trapdoors, and hidden corridors. Filming took place at the Comique Studios, which were recently vacated by Arbuckle due to his health issues and just general exhaustion. Keaton began working with Arbuckle's former cinematographer Elgin Lastly and technical director Fred Gabori, who remained with him until Keaton was basically forced to sign with MGM by the Schencks in 1929. Although Keaton completed The High Sign, he delayed its release because he felt it too closely mimicked Arbuckle's style, and he admired and respected Arbuckle. He would defend him during the Virginia Rappe trial, and Keaton also thought the gags were too ridiculous and clever for their own sake. Keaton was also suffering from a broken ankle when The High Sign was released. Keaton was no stranger to injuries on set, despite his adamant protest that he was never injured as a child. When performing with the 3 Keatons, Keaton broke his neck during a scene in which water from a water tower is pushed onto him, and he broke many of his bones throughout his life. Little did Buster know that Venice would also be the site of Orson Welles' 1958 film Touch of Evil. The location of Venice Beach had been suggested by Aldous Huxley to Welles, who informed him the town had decayed significantly since the 1910s, and Welles, with his cinematographer and art directors, drove there. he decided to revise the ending of the film to incorporate parts of Venice, including the city's Bridge of Sighs. The film incorporated deep focus, off-kilter, and low-angle shots to emphasize the girth of the main character, played by Welles, Quinlan. There are other stylistic touches that Welles put in to further the visual style of film noir, and we see this comparison with Buster Keaton, who was also a cameraman and also very well versed in different camera styles for his own movies, including The High Sign. Most notable among Welles' stylistic flourishes in his film is an opening crane shot that runs almost 3.5 minutes, which has been frequently commented on by film scholars. Welles himself worked on the film's editing in addition to being in the film, and the version was not well received despite starring Marlene Dietrich. However, it is now a remarkable film, and you see the good versus evil theme running through it. Orson Welles was a Buster Keaton fan and friend, and I believe Welles saw the funhouse scene in The High Sign and incorporated aspects of that for his film The Lady of Shanghai. When asked about Buster Keaton, Orson Welles was clearly great, showing his respect and admiration. During his introduction of Keaton's film The General for the Paul Killiam TV series The Silent Years, Welles recalled working with Buster and described him as a lovely person and a supreme artist, and I think one of the most beautiful people that was ever photographed. This is accurate. Keaton's beauty in film has been remarked on consistently. His flexibility, his ability to understand deeper themes of films is incredible. Here in The General, which is about a Confederate victory over Union forces, you see Keaton's intensity, and it's one of his most beloved films for great reason. You also have the incorporation of train imagery, which was very important at the time. There was expansion of the United States railroads in 1916, and even F. Scott Fitzgerald, who would later work in Hollywood, commented that the train is a remarkable symbol to the American people because we still don't know where we are going. On The General, Welles rated it one of the great films of all time, one of my favorites, and the American Film Institute would later agree in the 1990s. Welles further stated, "In fact, I think The General is the Civil War movie. Nothing ever came near it, not only for beauty, but for the curious feeling of authenticity. It's 100 times more stunning visually than Gone with the Wind." Now, The General is a visually stunning film. The shots of old southern towns with Union and Confederate soldiers is remarkable. Keaton's family touring around America were very familiar with the sights and sounds and smells of these towns, and it's something that Keaton really advocated to get across in The General. Keaton's acting and the involvement with the trains and then the ending of the film with this beautiful romantic kiss is also what makes the film great. Personally, I think Our Hospitality, produced in 1923, which also has Southern themes, is a better film, and it's the film that has this amazing waterfall rescue scene, which Keaton just got immediately. I think that's the better film, but The General is an incredibly important film and has been recognized by the United States National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Now, Welles mentioned working with Buster Keaton, and what he was referring to was working with Buster at the old Stage Door Canteen located in New York City during World War II. As I'm sure you know, Welles' relationship with the federal government and propaganda for the federal government, taking him down to Brazil, for example, is very widely researched, and he once said that he and FDR are the two best actors in the country. So Welles was involved in war efforts. Keaton had served with the United States Army in World War I, and so both of these actors found themselves in the Stage Door Canteen during World War II. The Stage Door Canteen, not to be confused with the Hollywood Canteen, which is located in Hollywood, was founded by the American Theater Wing in 1942. The entertainers were largely unpaid and volunteered their talents as a way of supporting the morale of American troops on leave during World War II. It was operated in the Broadway Theater District of New York City. And it opened on March 2nd, 1942, and operated 7 nights a week in the previously unoccupied little club under the 44th Street Theater at 216 West 44th Street in Manhattan. The official estimate of attendance on the canteen's opening night was over 1,200 people, with 200 actresses acting as hostesses and 75 name actors as busboys. The canteen was very popular and led to the establishment of other canteens throughout the United States, as well as in London and Paris. The social aspect of these canteens cannot be understated, and it was an ability for entertainers to support their country, and we have the federal government buying properties that were unused to bolster the local economies. The canteen had free food, and between 5 p.m. and midnight daily, the canteen served 200 gallons of coffee, and people smoked over 5,000 cigarettes. This is important because both Keaton and Welles were prolific smokers. If you listen to Keaton's voice, many people thought that due to his short stature, he was only 5'5", that his voice would be high-pitched. But if you listen to him, he has a very deep, scratchy, cigarette-induced voice, and you can hear hints of Kansas in his accent as well as the American South. Orson Welles was also a smoker. Orson Welles and Buster Keaton were both chewed up and spat out by the studio system. In 1928, the Schenck family arranged a deal with MGM for Keaton's services. Keaton had little to say about the details of the MGM contract. He no longer had any financial responsibility for his films, and his salary had been pre-negotiated. Gone were the days when Keaton was able to handle the camera, handle the scenes, and star in his own films. Keaton would later call the MGM contract signing the worst business decision of his life. His creative input was incredibly limited. He wasn't permitted to change scripts as he had when he was an independent film creator, and so his career suffered. As we see with Orson Welles, who was shut out of the studio system after Citizen Kane, both of these men struggled and succeeded after this shutting out. While Orson Welles would throw himself into artistic endeavors and basically become the father of the indie film, Buster Keaton was more family-oriented. In 1921, he married Natalie Talmadge, his leading lady in Our Hospitality, and the sister of actresses Norma Talmadge, who was married to his business partner Joseph Schenck, and Constance Talmadge. They had 2 children, James and Robert, but the marriage began to suffer because Talmadge decided not to have any more children and banished Keaton to a separate bedroom. She was also more extravagant than hers, and she spent up to a third of Keaton's earnings. Keaton had designed and built a modest cottage for her as a wedding gift, and when she saw the house, she flew into a rage because she thought the house was much too small and there was no place for servants. After the marriage failed, there was a divorce in 1932. Keaton descended into alcoholism. Talmadge kept his sons from Buster, and this was an incredibly hard blow because Buster was a family man. He was briefly institutionalized for alcoholism, and in 1933 he married his nurse, May Scriven, during an alcoholic binge, which afterwards he claimed to know nothing, and he did not remember the marriage at all. She filed for divorce in 1935 after finding him with Leah Clampett Sewell, the wife of millionaire Barton Sewell, in a hotel in Santa Barbara. The divorce went through in 1936 at great financial cost to Keaton. After undergoing aversion therapy, he stopped drinking for 5 years. In 1940, he married the dancer Eleanor Norris, who was 23 years his junior. She put time and effort into salvaging his life and career, into building him up in Hollywood. The marriage lasted until his death. Between 1947 and 1954, the couple appeared regularly in the Cirque Medrano in Paris as a double act.